This is Designing Security Products, where we talk about the intersection of cybersecurity research and product design. I'm William Donald, and I'm the host. And today I'm talking with John Robertson, who is a senior UX researcher who's been in the cybersecurity and UX space for a while. So, hi, John. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've been chatting just a little bit beforehand about kind of what we could discuss today, and I've got a couple of topics that I think we could hit on, but feel free to kind of take us wherever you think we should go. But let's get started with tell us a little bit about you. Who is John, and how did you get caught up in this whole cybersecurity UX world that we're a part of?
Yeah, so I've always kind of leaned towards more complex domains. I'm especially interested in like areas where you have maybe a additional component as to add complexity there. So I'm thinking like, I worked in airlines for a while. You always have the like physical experience of being at an airport in addition to like anything you want to do digitally. So that's always interesting. And so cybersecurity is the epitome of like a complex workflow where you have a lot of competing things to think about, not just your UI and your UX.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think the complexity is probably one of the things that drew me to it as well, honestly, just because there's really interesting problems to solve here. So what about I know that you said that that's kind of what drew you to the industry. So maybe tell me a little bit about your experience that you've had at working on cybersecurity products, and if there's anything noteworthy or interesting there.
Yeah, so a lot of what I worked on was cybersecurity analyst software. So stuff that mostly cybersecurity practitioners would use. Now, with enterprise software, you always have a variety of different users and experience levels and things like that using it, but that was kind of the main product. And so I thought it was interesting there because of the user types. And what I mean by that is like cybersecurity analysts are technical users. And so if your product isn't doing it the way they want it to be done or at all, they can do a little workaround or sometimes write a little query to do what they want to see or make the product the way you want it to work. That is awesome from a UX researcher perspective because that's like obvious opportunities for us as a product, but it also makes it more interesting because they could be doing their own thing. You have no idea because you only see the web analytics of like what they're actually touching, or you do like a usability test and you guide them through using your product. And there's this whole other world you might not be seeing. So super interesting there.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you're creating a product for consumers or even in other enterprise software, you're not necessarily is your user as technically savvy as a lot of times our user is. It's kind of like we're design nerds that are creating software for other nerds, right? So they might
Right.
build their own little thing to kind of solve a problem or add on to. So that's a great point. Have you found any ways are there any specific questions or any techniques to find out have you created any tools that help you solve this problem?
Yeah. And I think it's good to kind of give a little context. So something that kind of put me on to this question very early, especially with like, again, this tool or the cybersecurity space is I started looking at the analytics and saw like the internal users I was working with who are paid to use the tool every day, basically, were on it every day. And then the customers were on it like less than once a week.
Mm.
And that immediately tells me like, okay, what else are you doing? And it's obviously helpful to be like, your product is not their world, even though it might be your world. But that was kind of a very obvious, like, okay, hold on, stop. We need to explore like what else. There's 4 days a week they're not using our product. What's going on there? And so that's kind of where I, as a researcher, can work. Like, let me just sit with you for a while. Um, and actually, this is what I love doing in a new space or a very technical space like cybersecurity is like, let me spend a week like sitting with some different types of users who use the product just to see what their life is like, how many tabs they have open. And with cybersecurity people, it's like, how many screens do they have? How many tools are they using? Usually we're like 5, 6 tools, 3 screens, like super interesting and complex. And it's it's really that like observing their real day to day that's important there. So I think that's a good kind of starting point.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. A lot of times when you're working, even if you're creating software for enterprise customers, they're not necessarily as tech savvy as the users that we're creating software for, right? So it's kind of like we're design nerds who are creating stuff for security nerds, right? So they might actually write a little script to help augment what you do, or they've got other tools that maybe they've even built. So have you found any techniques for being able to find that information out and kind of go mining for gold in the other things that they might have built?
Yeah, so I want to go back and kind of talk about why I even in this area at least started looking at this. So I pulled some just general analytics like, hey, like what's going on? Who's doing what? And there was like a very clear two populations. Internal users were on the product daily, which isn't super surprising, but customer users were like on it once a week. And so when you see that, you start going, how much do we actually know about what they're doing day to day? Like, we know what they do on our product, but they're barely on our product. So, like, what else is going on? And so, I really love like getting in those workflows and like sitting with different users, especially like when you're onboarding onto a technical product. Like, I learn by doing and watching people and seeing what's going on and seeing that they have 3 screens and 5 different tools open at once every day is not only interesting, but helps you paint a very detailed picture of like, what is their life like? How does our product actually fit into this? And I think you miss that if you don't kind of sit with them or like actually observe what they're doing at kind of a broader level. You know, we do usability tests or like do this task on our product. You're just missing all of this great, interesting detail when you focus just on that level.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's like a super dense answer to the question of how do you solve this problem today? When you're talking about sitting with them, I'm curious, are you are you literally sitting with them in a chair next to them? Or is this more of a virtual, let's get in a video chat and you screen share and let's talk through?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. I think sitting with people is really great. Like, sat with a security analyst who had a separate keyboard that was just like 5 keys keyboard that he had mapped to specific like interactions or things he wanted to do on the tool. That's not something you would see if you're just screen sharing. I think cybersecurity generally, like you don't have to be there in person as much because just share all of your screens is usually enough. But like I'm thinking about, I know a lot of cybersecurity people who also do like the site security. Can I get through your building or your security testing, those sorts of things as well, which is obviously more physical. So it kind of depends, but I do like sitting with people. You also get like those in between moments to talk to them. Like I sat with a customer support agent at an airline who we just listened to someone who's driving to the airport in Miami and like screaming at her husband for making her late for this flight while trying to get us to help her. And then, once that call's over, you have a little moment to kind of bond with the user, kind of talk about like, what do you do? So yeah, it's kind of a fun time as well, just to be there in person too.
Yeah, yeah. Have you run into any problems with, especially when we're talking about security people? My experience has been that they are a little more cagey, if you will, and less willing to share. They're a little more, and for good reason. There's a reason that they're in this industry, right? So either they are less willing to share too much information, or are concerned about oversharing, and they also know that there are some security risks with them sharing their screen. Are you seeing privileged information? So there's a legitimate concern there, but then there's also sometimes it just kind of comes with the territory that they're just a little. I did a user testing session with somebody one time over video chat, and everybody turns their camera on, and this person, we were in a Google Meet and he didn't want to reveal his identity. And so he used a little animated, he was actually an animated cartoon robot while we were talking about real things. And I had to kind of say, okay, I get it, So, but that was a really long way of asking the question of, have you run into any problems with sharing privileged information in the security space as you're doing this?
Yeah, I do think that's where maybe like going in person can help. Like if you take a notebook and a pen, like they can see what you're writing. You're clearly not recording their entire screen and like very private or sensitive information. So there is kind of a benefit there with the physical stuff.
Sure.
That's obviously not available most times. And that's why, with enterprise software and with like these sorts of tools, it's nice when you work for one of these companies and you can just do a test account that's fully functional and just say like, here's all fake data. But you're right. I think it is something that's difficult and something you have to overcome. Building trust, I think, is a big part of this. Like, there's not that many cybersecurity analysts in the world. And so you can build some relationships there and kind of like build up that trust a little easier, which is, in my mind, can be a big difference between like enterprise versus consumer stuff. You're working with a much more limited pool of people who are working in this space. And so oftentimes I'm working a little more closely with people just because of that.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a point that I've heard as I've talked with other people that are in UX and cybersecurity is we do have such a small pool of target audience members that one of the biggest challenges is just sourcing people to test with. I know that's a problem even in any industry, but it seems like maybe I'm just, it seems like a bigger deal because I'm having to deal with this problem. But
Sure.
Have you found any good techniques for finding and recruiting people to do testing with?
I mean, I think the traditional advice is like perhaps going with the like snowball method where you're like, hey, do you have any friends who would also want to make $100 to talk to me? Which can help. I mean, I think there's some obvious biases there, but that's kind of how the world works though, right? You have some relationships with people. You're like, hey, do you have like a manager I could talk to? Whereas like you were talking about this team you're often partnering with, like you set me up with them and see what their perspective of it is. So I do think there's a lot of that happens. I often use like salespeople, customer support people to like send me like, hey, this is kind of what we're hearing. Here's some like of the loudest people. Again, you have to deal with bias. Again, there is that issue of the loudest getting more attention, but they're just like kind of building those relationships can help you build up this participant pool. And like I said, I think trust is great. Building trust with people and like those relationships helps you get kind of a broader, more representative participant pool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you find that sometimes getting access to people can be a challenge if you don't have, if higher up the chain in your organization, there's not they don't fully understand the value of UX research and testing? Can that be a challenge?
Yeah, I think especially because like my immediate or like a lot of people's immediate thought here is like we're having trouble in the free ways to get participants. Let's hire a vendor, which is probably the best way to do this. Like hire someone who specializes in recruiting participants that are hard to find. Makes sense. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars per study, though, which also often turns people off, right? It's like you're telling me you need 20 grand to do your job this month, and then you need another 20 grand next month. Or so there can be some barriers. What I do, or like my way of convincing people, is like bringing the real user voice to these conversations, but partnering with development teams, partnering with product people to say like, here's what people are saying. Here's the real like business impact to it, bringing, those stakeholders in to like provide their perspective and saying, as a team, like looking at the business side, looking at the user side, here's our plan, really helps to get that support. And so I love taking a user video to like a senior VP and saying like, listen to the pain in this person's voice as they describe going through this. Now this is what we want to do about it. We have like an alignment across everybody. You can't ignore how painful it is. So let's go and deal with this.
Yeah, or the reverse of that can sometimes be true. We have assumptions coming into this. Man, this is going to be really difficult. This is a big problem for users. And sometimes management, let's just use management as the general term, right, says this is a problem we absolutely need to solve. And then we do some testing. And when we talk with users, they say, I mean, that'd be nice, but honestly, I have this workaround that's right here. Sometimes you can get surprised and it can save you some time and some money creating a feature no one wants, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's people love to hear that too.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty good.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead.
One of the other things you mentioned was that here's the business impact this work is going to have. And so I'm curious as what advice would you have for other product teams on figuring out which metrics are the most important to track? What are the KPIs that we should be looking at? And I know that can vary from product to product. So maybe here's what would be awesome is if like here's a framework for figuring out what the most important KPIs and metrics are. You got anything in your bag of goodies?
Yeah. I've done a lot of different frameworks. I think the Google Heart one from a like conceptual perspective is really nice because it talks about like goals, signals, metrics. So whether you want to follow their specific like acronym, which is like, I think we cannot talk about it, but because I don't remember it. But, I think the big thing is as a team saying, these are our goals. How do we know if we met them? Which should be pretty easy if I've been on teams where it's not that easy, but you should at least be able to say like, we're building this so people could do this faster, or we're building this so our customers know that something's gone wrong in this area. And then you can build from there. So I really take that forward. And there isn't like a one size fits all, but you can say, this is what we want this to do. How will we know if we do that? Super important because I've worked places where the team says, hey, we released this and like we weren't really tracking it post-release. And now it's 6 months later and no one's using it anymore. Why? What's going on? And it's like you kind of have to build in that process like throughout the workflow and measure it afterwards. And I think, like I said, that Google Heart, like the idea at least, is really helpful in working through as a team. We be measuring and when.
Yeah, that's great. I would love to say that I'm smart enough to know what the acronym stands for. My trusty AI over here has told me that H for happiness, and it mentions using a net promoter score, but still happiness. Let's stick with that, right? E is for engagement, sense. A is adoption, R is retention, and T is task success. When I think about those 5 things, I'm like, that feels like a really good framework there. So Google's Heart framework, and that's for. So
yeah. So those are actually pretty good from a user experience point of view for sure. Yeah, so I kind of use that from a business side as well. What is our goal? Is it to increase revenue? Is it to make our customers feel like they have what they need? Is it, what are we looking to do? And then we can work from there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the answer is almost always in a company, the top line is like increase revenue, right? But it's like, okay, sure, but what are the things we do in order to basically get someone to the point where they say, please take my money, right? So obviously increased revenue is the ultimate goal that we have for a successful product. There's certainly some steps along the way to that. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What about, I know one of the things you had mentioned that you would like to talk about is kind of the importance of selling UX research up the chain. So can you talk a little bit more about that and your thoughts on that?
I think I used my answer already.
Not sure if there was more there or not. I
Uh,
tried to set it up and I was like, maybe there's more there before. So okay, great. We'll skip that one. Not skip, like check it done. We'll check it done. And we talked about the KPIs and metrics. I've got the sheet pulled up here in front of me. Is there anything else that's jumping out at you? I love stories. Do you have
Yep.
do you have any stories that you'd want to
Yeah.
tell? Feel free to kind of say, hey, I've got a story about so and so, and then I can kind of set it up,
Okay.
or I can just be real generic and just say,
Yeah, I think we could talk a little bit because a lot of my more recent research was on like AI and cybersecurity. I think from like what you were talking about, cybersecurity people are kind of skeptical by nature and more guarded. So it was kind of interesting to do that. And I have a story about like a lottery security team and the differences between how they worked. So I don't know how if you want to set that up with just like AI is like there's a big hype about it. What have you seen? Something like that.
yeah, I can set that up. So all right. So I know when we were talking before, you mentioned that some of the work you've most recently been doing is kind of the integration of AI into cybersecurity. And I'm thinking maybe I might have heard something about AI being important in every single cybersecurity booth that you go to at RSA and most of the posts on LinkedIn. So I know that you've got a great story to tell about this. So tell us about that story of the interaction between AI and cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's interesting because you often hear from cybersecurity management or trainers saying like, we are interested in this. It can be very helpful. And obviously you have alerts, you have detections that are machine learning based and have for a while. But this LLM hype and like the excitement behind that, enthusiasm behind that has made people a little nervous about over reliance, right? And I was actually talking to a guy who works for one of the big lottery systems here. And he was saying, I overheard one of my coworkers say, hey, this is ChatGPT. This is who does my job for me. I'm just really like nervous about that because they're both cybersecurity people. They're both like supposed to be very like guarded, protecting data, and then you have a coworker saying like ChatGPT does my job for me. And this sounds crazy, but I mean there is that happening. And you have people who've been in the industry for a while saying like what happens if something goes wrong? What do we like? It's kind of one of those like uphill in the snow both ways to school kind of things. But you do wonder, like, what happens if you do need to see in the like raw code? What happens without an LLM telling you? What are you gonna do? Or like, what if something goes down and you have to fix it? And it's like a proprietary system, or it's data you can't share. I mean, there's a lot of instances, especially in cybersecurity, where you can't just say like ChatGPT, do this for me. And so there's a lot of worries there. And I think they're founded, yeah, they're definitely legitimate worries.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the flip side of it is that it's such a powerful tool. I mean, it is a game-changing tool. The argument goes like this: if the companies that don't learn how to leverage AI are going to get left behind. And so then if your company is bankrupt, then it doesn't really matter, right? And that's an extreme case for sure.
Sure.
But what I think we do need to focus on is figuring out how can we leverage AI or LLMs, whatever you want to call it, right? We'll just call it AI for general. How can you leverage the things that it is really good at, but put it in an environment where it is safe? You've got it in a sandbox, you give it some data, it helps you find the interesting things that are in that data, right? Or there's other places where there's kind of semi-public information, like let's say APIs, right? That's not public, but it's meant to be shared, otherwise it wouldn't be in an API. So if you've got access to that information, then hopefully you should have access to that information. And so maybe it can help parse that and figure out what are the parts that we should be looking at, or put it in a format. Nobody wants to read JSON. We want to, we can throw a big JSON file at AI and say, hey, what's the important stuff? And put this in a format that a human can read and understand. And it can be really good at things like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think what I was really interested in or pushing for was that, like, here is the JSON, you have it. But having moments where it's like, this is kind of weird, this is what this means, or like, there's no way you have seen like this JSON string before. The AI just explains it right there, like, here's what this is, or why you should care about it. And so I think, especially in cybersecurity, like having that, here's the data, here's why you should care, helps, again, kind of people not become over reliant on it, but to learn as they go through. And they learn as they go through, but they're not having to like slog through hundreds of lines of code and like Google things they've never seen before, which is just very painful, as you kind of alluded to here.
I mean, I've alluded to it, and I've also experienced that pain firsthand, as I'm sure too, right? Yeah, it's all about whether a user is using the products that we create, and then kind of as on the side is using a tool like a ChatGPT, like a Gemini, like a Claude, whatever, to kind of help interpret the information, or it is something that we are helping bake into the product that helps make sense of all of the data that's there, right? I think that what we need to do as designers and as researchers is figure out how can we allow AI to do the things that it's really good at, to help humans, to set things up so that humans can do the thing that they're really good at, which is figuring out, okay, what do I do with this now that I understand this information, right? It's the interesting things have been brought to my attention. I can see the connections or where something is fishy or suspicious or whatever, and then I, as a human being, can make a decision on what to do with that information. I think that's what, and anytime that I've talked with people who are in UX and cyber, that's our goal. And ultimately that's the goal of every product team, is to make it much easier for our user to accomplish the thing they're wanting to accomplish.
Exactly. Yeah, and as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about like, a lot of people I actually have worked with are not cybersecurity people. They're like the tech guy at the company. And so they're doing networking and IT support. And oh, yeah, you need to make sure we don't get hacked. Good luck. And so this is where this is especially helpful. It's not that they are not understanding what's going on, but if all they have is noise, and they're already overwhelmed with like tickets from IT support and like upgrading systems, it's very difficult and can leave their company in a bad spot. So like drawing their attention to what's important, making sure they understand like this is why it's important, and making that really straight line between points is super helpful for those folks as well.
Yeah. Speaking of AI integration into the apps, are there any apps that you have seen recently that you think do a great job of incorporating AI?
I mean, maybe I won't talk about SecureWorks because I was part of those projects. I do think they do a good job of like, here's why you're getting this output. Trying to think of some other security ones, but I mean, I do think you see such a adoption of LLMs because it is kind of the way you think about things, or like a lot of humans think about things. It's like, I have a question, what's the answer? And then you have like a normal conversation and you're like, actually, let's dig a little deeper. And so at least the way I think my brain works is when I see lines and lines of code, I'm thinking like, oh, what does that do? And I'm not necessarily looking for another line of code to tell me that. I'm looking at like, what are the concepts going on here? Like, how does this work from a higher level perspective? And I think that's why these LLMs do so well, is we're naturally kind of curious and we want kind of these answers that talk to us in a way that our brain thinks about things, which is in words and in concepts. And so I do think that's kind of why the hype is the way it is.
I mean, the hype is there because it's real, and there's a lot of hype that is not real, right? But at its most fundamental, place. I remember hearing a story. I'm not sure if it's apocryphal or not, but the guys, Larry and Sergey, when they had the vision for Google, the search engine,
Mm.
back when it was just a search engine instead of all of these other things, they were inspired by Star Trek being able to kind of ask a question of the computer, and the computer would be able to answer any question. Again, I don't know if this is actually what happened or not, but I heard this story. And so part of what they wanted to do with Google is be able to answer that. And I think the Google that we had 10 years ago, gosh, it's been 20 years probably, right? That got very close to it. But now with the advent of AI, it feels like we're much, much closer to that. Like you can kind of ask any question to, remember the first time I asked questions of Alexa, it's like, wow, that's great. She can just tell me what the temperature outside is, or she can tell me what the internal temperature of a chicken breast is supposed to be, like little things like that. But now we're in a place where, and I don't know if you've seen any of the models that have very normal speaking patterns and everything. I mean, it's some of it is uncanny how great it is talking, and you're like, I feel like I'm talking to a person on the other side. All the little pauses and those little weird idiosyncrasy things that do. And so we're kind of in that place. So it makes me think, how might we incorporate those types of concepts into the security products? Like how can we put it in a context that users are able to just kind of ask a question and get the answer they want, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what, like, you bring up like the speech patterns and things like that. And actually when I was talking to some of these cybersecurity folks, they were talking about, I think there was a metric that came out that was like, this is how much computing power has been spent on people saying please and thank you to
I saw
the
that
ChatGPT, right? So they were we talked a lot about tone because they're wanting an answer, but they're also under time pressure. And they're also like dealing with very serious topics that are very like technical or specific in nature. They don't want like this buildup of like, oh, that's a great question. Let's talk about like, they just want the answer, right? And so there is a way to kind of like, let's design to help, exactly what our customers are wanting or our analysts are expecting to see. So I do think that's kind of an interesting area in itself. Just like, they're like, I don't want to say thank you to my AI agent. I just want you to do like the job. And yeah, so definitely interesting and a different way to do it. But I do think, their work is very much like a researcher's job where you are like, you see something a little interesting and you're like, let's go deeper into that. And that's where these models kind of help you, where you're like, what does this mean? Like, is this normal? Is this part of like this API call from random company that I've never heard of? Like, definitely great. Or like something I saw a lot of is people would have to open up like a sandbox to go to different URLs that they've never heard of to see if it's like, is this legitimate or is this like some sort of scam or what's the deal? And just like bringing that answer very quickly instead of them like going through and looking at it is another place that I think is very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I completely agree. You mentioned going deeper, and I feel like we have gotten pretty deep in the AI thing, and it's
Yeah.
super interesting to me. But I also know that we're wanting to kind of wrap this call up at around the 30-minute mark, and so I'll ask this as kind of a last question that's here, because you've been great and given great insights. So if you were going to give advice to let's say an early stage product team on, let's say they had limited resources and they were really interested in getting kind of bang for their buck for utilizing UX research, what is the advice you would give to them?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just go back to what I was saying earlier is I really think getting very deep insights is important, especially at early stages for these teams. And it's really not that costly to like go and interact with and sit with some users for a week. Like go just hang out with them, hear what they're talking about in the break room, take all of these great notes. And I mean, that'll give you layers upon layers that you won't even see initially. And then you'll do, like, to bring it back to what we just were talking about, you'll go, well, why did he say this? Or why was she like joking about this in the break room? You have plenty of other things to think about for research topics. But I mean, this is my advice when you're working on something new or working on something very technical or something as a UX person or a product person. That's, you don't have to become an expert in cybersecurity, right? I see a lot of people who are like, I want to know specifically what's going on with this security alert. It's like, will that help you design it better? Maybe. If you know why it's important to our customer, though, that will help you design it better. That will help you say, like, I don't need to know necessarily why this code is important, but when I see something like this, I know we need to bring it to the forefront. Or I don't necessarily need to know why a bunch of different companies have seen this alert, but I do need to know that that's interesting for people. Hey, 50,000 other instances of this have happened this week. Like, that's an interesting piece of information we should bring forward. Don't know if I'm rambling here, actually, but I want to bring that back to, like, I really believe in, like, soaking yourself in the environment, like really seeing day to day what this is like. I'm a data person. I'm a statistics person, but I can't get that from data or statistics. I can't get the real experience. And so that's kind of my advice. Spend a week with your users and you'll have more questions than you could ever answer. And it will let you see where, like, hey, I need to focus on this area, or like there's a ton of stuff we weren't expecting to see. Like, let's figure out where to go forward. And it only took you a week of just like seeing what the people who you want to use your product actually do every day.
Yeah. That's great. Super insightful. John, this has been great, man. I
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today. It's obvious that you are very knowledgeable on this topic and then also very passionate about it. And so I love to see the cross section of those things. And I've really enjoyed learning from you and learning with you, right? So
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time to be on here. And I hope you have a fantastic weekend because we're recording this on a Friday. Again, I just want to say thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. It was great. Thank you.